Welcome to Pacific Mammal Research's Marine Mammal Highlight Series. We are a 501c3 research and education nonprofit studying marine mammals in the Salish Sea off Washington State. In this series, you will learn about different marine mammals as we discuss interesting facts about each species. This is our way to geek out, share some information, and have some fun. We hope you enjoy the series, and be sure to follow us on Instagram to vote for which animal we talk about next. And without further ado, welcome to the PacMam podcast. I'm Cindy.
And I'm Kat.
And this week is a Marine Mammal Highlight. And thank you guys for voting. We had quite a few votes, and it was unlike past weeks where we've had lots of ties and very, very close. This was kind of a landslide. It was between the Hectors dolphin and the Heavisides dolphin. And the Hectors won very convincingly, like 70%.
You guys are ready to learn about Hector's dolphins, I guess.
And I wonder if it's someone, I mean, I think people, at least I have heard more about Hectors than Heavisides. So maybe it's just a recognition factor.
Yeah, I'm sure that helps too.
But either way, we're on to the Hector's dolphin. And I think we'll probably be doing dolphins for a while because we seem to have, we've gone through our porpoises and most of our baleen whales and a lot of our pinnipeds. So for some reason, we've left the dolphins off. So the next few.
Well, there's also more dolphins.
That's true. That's true.
The others. So there's that.
There's that.
More to choose from.
Little things. All right, so these guys are super cute. They're one of the most adorable dolphins, I think, and they're little. But Kat's going to talk about that, so she'll start off with our what they look like and kind of where they're at before I get into their diet and behavior. So let's start it off.
Yeah, so before we get into appearance and distribution, I do just want to clarify for those of you who are interested in marine mammals and might already know this. There are technically two subspecies of Hector's dolphins that have been formally recognized. So this is based on both morphological differences, so based on like physically different features, but also genetic evidence and reproductive isolation. So basically that they're not interbreeding.
And I have some exciting stuff about that in the research later. So
oh, cool. Okay. So the subspecies that retains the common name Hector's dolphin is occurring in the waters around the South Island of New Zealand. The other subspecies is known as the Maui dolphin or Maui's dolphin, which occurs only in the waters off of the west coast of the North Island of New Zealand. So these are very geographically isolated dolphins in general. And then they did basically discover that the Maui's dolphin is genetically different and isolated from the Hector's dolphin group. So I just wanted to put that out there because this is going to be one of those where we are kind of, especially with the appearance, I'm going to be talking about both subspecies, but then we're also going to be referring to them as a whole in some parts of this as well.
Yeah, I think
so
most of my stuff it's yeah, because they're not physically, they're not really that different. They're hard to tell the difference in
which is why there's subspecies versus two distinct species, right? Yeah. It's a little bit harder to tease apart.
And so like for mine, I'll have basically I'm going to be talking about my stuff as a whole, but then there'll be a couple points where I'll be like, well, this is particularly for Maui's or Hector's, but for the most part, they're very similar.
Yeah,
but they are
just to clarify that. So we are technically talking about two different subspecies here that are very, very similar.
Yeah.
So like Cindy said, they are the smallest dolphins in the world. They're only about 4 to 5 feet in length. The Maui's dolphin actually does get a little bit bigger than the common Hector's dolphins. So they can get up to 143 pounds, while the Hector's dolphins are only growing to about 110 pounds. So kind of your average woman's or like big kids weights here. So they're pretty small. In both subspecies, the females are larger than the males too, which is also kind of interesting. So in terms of what they look like, they are pretty short with stocky bodies. They have a very, very blunt face. So basically no or minimal external beak. And they have a relatively large fluke for their body size. So their tail is pretty big compared to how small their bodies are. They got
junk in the trunk.
There you go. They also have a very distinctive dorsal fin, which is extremely round. So it's been called Mickey Mouse ear dorsal fin style or dorsal fin shape because it's very, very rounded.
Yeah, I can see it, but also it doesn't, like if I looked at it, I didn't immediately go Mickey Mouse. If you say it, then I go,
yeah, okay, we were talking about this before we hit record. We're like, well, I totally get it. I'm like, no, I totally see why people would call it that. But It's very unique, especially so
Unusual.
again, if you do see these guys around New Zealand, you're going to be able to tell that it's a Hector's dolphin pretty easily. They also have paddle-like pec fins as well, so their flippers are more paddle-like.
They're all just more rounded in nature. Just
Generally, yeah,
little
exactly.
things.
They're kind of just like cute little round dolphins.
Mhm.
Um, and their coloration is also very distinctive. So they're gray, black, and white, and it does change as they age. So the as an adult, the sides of the head, the tail, the dorsal fin, and the flippers are all black, and then the throat, lower jaw, and belly are white. Most of the rest of the body is gray. They do have some very cool. I would definitely, if you're not watching the
Mhm.
YouTube version, I would definitely recommend looking these guys up because they are
They're
really beautiful.
adorable.
Um, yeah, they're super pretty, and they do have a thin black line that comes from the head to just behind the blowhole. So again, when you see these guys out in the wild, you're going to be pretty sure that you're seeing a Hector's dolphin, especially if you're in and around New Zealand. You're going to be pretty certain that this is what you're seeing.
Yeah, and
Um,
I'll note for the people who are watching on YouTube, Kat couldn't have her video on today for internet issues, so she's probably going to be a Hector's dolphin today.
I'm like, I'm okay with that. It's prettier than my regular face. So you're welcome, internet. You're welcome.
You're welcome.
Um, I get to be a Hector's dolphin. Also,
Good.
that's perfect because we're filming this right around Halloween, so I could just say that I was a Hector's dolphin for Halloween.
Exactly.
It's
Hmm.
perfect. They do have 26 to 32 pairs of small conical teeth because, again, they are dolphins, so they have cone-shaped teeth in both the upper and lower jaws. Um, so they have teeth in both jaws as well, just to clarify.
Yeah.
So, in terms of their distribution, like I said, they are native to New Zealand and they are typically found right around the coast. So, again, the Maui dolphins are typically only found along the northwest coast of the North Island. The common Hector's dolphins are found in the waters around the South Island, and they have three genetically distinct regional populations around there as well of the Hector's dolphins. Typically, you're going to see these guys within about 20 nautical miles of the coast, and they prefer water that's less than 300 feet deep. So they are, more shallow water swimmers, and very, very coastal. And they do have relatively small home ranges as well, typically less than about 31 miles, I found on one site,
Hmm.
and high site fidelity. So they do have some longer movement patterns, but for the most part, they're sticking close to home and they don't really travel as far. I'm sure Cindy will get into that a little bit as well.
Well, you basically said it, but yeah,
Okay, cool. So basically they don't really travel too far. They're
yeah.
pretty well conserved around the waters of the South Island or restricted to the northwest waters of the North Island,
Hmm.
for the Maui dolphins. Um, so yeah, that's what the Hector's dolphins look like and where they are found. So if you are in New Zealand or going to New Zealand, definitely keep your eyes peeled for these guys because they are adorable. And you are most likely, like, unlike some of the species we've talked about, you are likely to be able to identify them when they surface because of that
Yeah.
really, really extremely rounded dorsal fin.
There's like no other dolphin that has that rounded of a dorsal
No,
fin.
and especially with the markings in
Yeah.
conjunction with that and their size because they are super small.
Yeah.
So yeah,
They're
that's what
super
these guys look like and where they live.
excellent. Yeah, so they, like I said, they're, I just think they're one of the cutest little dolphins. And we'll actually, I'm sure later with the kind of fun facts, I know we'd like to do their different names and stuff, and there's some
Mm-hmm.
fun ones that go along with that. Um, but so these guys, and I'll say now that a lot, these remind me a lot of harbor porpoises, actually, in the way
Mm,
that they are socially, just, well, part of the way they're socially, but just a lot of their behavior and certain aspects of their ecology are very reminiscent. For the one thing, being close to that shore, close to shore all the time, right? Harbor
mm-hmm.
porpoises are similar in that way. They're very, very coastal, and so they are more susceptible to a lot of the anthropogenic, human threats, which I know
Which
you'll get into
we'll
later.
get into. Oh yeah.
Yeah, but it's they're very similar in what the other coastal species like harbor porpoises are, have to be worried about.
Hmm.
um, so for their diet, as Kat says, they usually live within the 20 nautical miles in waters less than 328 feet. They dive very shallow, only dive for 2 or 3 minutes at a time. Also, probably because they don't have a lot of lung capacity because they're so small.
Right.
So that will
Yeah.
limit you. They tend to like shallow sandy bottom. That's preferred. They eat a different range of things. So they eat cephalopods, which interestingly, mainly that's squid. they say cephalopods, but then everything that talks about that, they just say squid. Some crustaceans like crabs, but their main diet is small fish. So, for example, the ones that I found most often cited were red cod, yellow-eyed mullet, flounder, mackerel, ahuru, which is pink cod. I guess that's different than red cod. Slight different coloration. Arrow squid, sprat, sole, and stargazer, which I think is a cool name, personally. So those are the most common ones. They are found they remain close to shore due to, they think, in a lot of cases, due to inshore larval presence. So in spring and summer, many species go in that way to spawn.
Interesting. That
and
makes
then
sense.
it's handy for them. Interestingly, and these are again for the Hector, so there's the East Coast and the West Coast sides. The East Coast eats a more diverse prey, so 8 different species on average, whereas the West Coast only eats about 4 different species on average. And I'll have something to note about that in the new research as well, how that kind of ties in. But that, that can go into conservation, right? One side can eat more things than the other. That may be difficult if something happens to one of those prey species. The only thing I saw was that they'll flex at the surface or swim on their side during feeding, which is, especially swimming on their side, I think is a fairly common behavior for feeding, but they specifically mentioned those behaviors. And they are seen foraging around fishing boats that use trawl nets, which I know Kat will definitely get into in the threats. But so they're around there, but they're thought to be hunting the fish that are on the seafloor that are disturbed by the trawling gear rather than the fish that are captured in the net.
Right. So unlike some species that we've talked about where there's direct competition between the fishermen and the cetacean species, in this case, it's more of a byproduct of like, oh, well, you're disturbing these critters. Let me go grab them.
Right.
Yeah.
It's like the egrets and stuff that hang out around ungulates, like horses and rhinos and all these other different herbivores, that they're just like, hey, we're going to hang out while you're pulling up all the grass. All these little bugs come up and that's what we're going to go eat.
Yeah.
That's the one kind of thing. So behaviorally, they are in small groups of 2 to 4, up to 20, sometimes over 100. And so that's somewhat similar of, as I said, with harbor porpoises, where we see small groups of even less than 2 to 4, but they do aggregate. But in contrast to them, they are, in contrast to harbor porpoises, these guys are, when they get in their larger groups, they are boisterous. I love that word. It works really well with their cute little Hector dolphin, like, oh, you're just like a cute little boisterous dolphin. They're acrobatic, excitable, noisy, and so a lot of the behaviors that you'll see are body contact, bubble blowing, leaping, lobtailing, spy hopping, surfing, bow riding. And so they do that quite a bit, but less active than others like spinners or dusky dolphins, which basically just fly out of the water all the time. They're very acrobatic. So they're kind of in the middle, where they do it quite a bit, but not as much as others. The aggression, when they show aggression, that's generally tail splashing, chasing, biting, bubble blowing, and lobtailing. So lobtailing is like that cartwheel where they slap their zooks across the water. The bubble blowing, I don't know if it's the same thing as what we see with dolphins in the Bahamas. They call it a torus or a bubble ring, and that is very much says, I'm not happy with you right now. Breaching is often done when feeding and is also associated with excitement, as also lobtailing is too. So apparently that's what they do when they get excited, is breach or do cartwheels. And they found that they speak in the frequency that we can hear. Even their high frequency clicks are still within our audible range. So they found that high frequency clicks that we can hear are often linked with aerial behavior and may indicate excitement. So they may be literally squealing while they're jumping, which I thought was super, super cute. They are actually slow swimmers comparatively to other species, and they use an undulating motion. And they didn't really explain much more than that. But I'm guessing it's just a little bit different than how other dolphin species tend to.
Yeah, interesting.
I guess more of a body motion versus just their flukes, perhaps.
Right.
They will swim close to each other when around boats, and that could be a sign of stress. But I've saw other things that said that they will readily approach boats, and there are swim with and watch programs if you go to New Zealand. So I'm not too sure exactly where they lie, and there may be some individual differences, right? Some may be fine with boats, and some maybe not so much.
Right. Well, and again, in terms of comparing that to harbor porpoise, we see a similar thing in our study site where sometimes the harbor porpoise are really reactive to boats going through the pass. Other times they completely ignore them and go about their business.
Yeah,
So it might be dependent on the type of boat too.
exactly, and what the behavior that they're doing at the time, right?
Yeah.
May be able to be like, I can ignore that, or nope, I can't. Their social structure is not like harbor porpoises, or at least, well, we don't really know what harbor porpoise social structure is, but likely is not. It's much more similar to other dolphin species in that fission fusion. So basically, they come together, they go apart, they come together, they go apart in groups that kind of constantly change throughout the day. And I always equate that to, people. You get up with your family, then you go to work, and you're with different people. Then maybe you go to lunch with different people. You go back to work, you go back home. So you're you have these associations that are changing throughout the day depending on the behavior that you're doing. And so, but these guys, but within that, a lot of dolphin species have long-term associations that are kept. But for these guys, it looks like their associations tend to last no longer than a few days. In the general terms, obviously, mothers and calves are a different story. But their regular associations tend to just be fleeting comparatively. They often will form groups of either only males or only females. The mixed groups are more common for Maui dolphins, interestingly. Not sure why. They do form nursery groups, so those are exclusively pretty much moms and calves, or cow-calf pairs as they are called. And they will separate from individuals that don't have calves. So basically, like, I have a baby, sorry, can't hang out with you. I got to hang out with other people who have babies, other Hector's dolphins. And then sometimes juveniles will group up together with no adults. So once they get old enough, they go off on their with their friends and do what Hector's dolphins do as juveniles. So that companions can change often in those different groupings. I will say one note about the small home ranges. I have the exact same stats that Kat had, that high site fidelity, but there were some long-term movements documented of over 250 miles. So as with almost any species we've ever talked about, even if they have high site fidelity, there are going to be some guys that just want to go on a walkabout and go explore the world. So that's that. I will note one thing, and this will lead up to the threats that Kat will talk about a little bit later, is that there can be up to 31 commercial boat trips per day in Akaroa Harbor. Yeah. Akaroa. So just keep that in mind when we talk about the things that they're dealing with. Reproductively, their lifespan is a max of 22 years. So this is also somewhat comparative to harbor porpoises, where we don't really know how long they live, but it's the max lifespan is around that 22, 25 year mark. But what's really interesting is, so they have a relatively short lifespan compared to other dolphin species that live about 50 years or more. And so when that happens, you usually have to start having babies earlier in life. So for example, harbor porpoises start having babies at around 3 years of age, 3 or 4. But these guys don't become sexually mature until 6 to 9 years of age.
Wow.
Which is kind of late.
Yeah, I mean, that's like half your life at that point. Like your life, you're middle-aged.
Yeah, exactly. And so this will go into their ability to rebound, is how quickly can they, based on their this life history.
Right.
They mate in the summer. Gestation is about 10 to 12 months. They give birth in early November, mid-February. And remember, we're in the southern hemisphere now, so that's the
this
warm
is
time.
austral summer is what we're talking about here.
Right. The calving interval also is fairly long. It's 2 to 4 years.
Yeah.
And again, harbor porpoises, they can give birth every year. So it's very interesting. The calves will stay with the mom for 1 to 2 years, with 2 being more common. And again, with harbor porpoises, it's only about a year. So I just found it super interesting that they start late, they have a relatively long calving interval and how long the calves are with the mom compared to how long they live. So that will be a problem with these animals getting back to higher numbers. Back to your cute little little round, the fact that they're all round and just compared to other dolphins. The calves are tiny, and this is my favorite thing that I found so far. They equated them to rugby balls with flippers.
Oh my gosh.
Isn't that adorable?
That's so cute.
I was like, so now I'm just imagining a little rugby
I want to
ball.
see a baby's Hector's dolphin now.
Right?
That
Exactly.
might need to go on the bucket list.
Yeah, so I might have to. I always say in my presentations that there's nothing cuter than a baby bottlenose dolphin because they have that cute little stubby nose, their beak and everything. But now they may have to. Rugby balls with flippers, I think beats that. I think it does.
Yep, I think so.
Males have very large testes. They're 2.9% of their body mass.
Wow.
So this indicates a sperm competition. So they're not fighting for the individuals. They're just mating with as many as possible. Very similar to harbor porpoises, right? That promiscuous mating system. Both sexes have multiple mates. They just mate and mate and mate until something catches. And also similar to porpoises, in the larger groups, they saw more sexual behavior. And as we've seen too, right? We usually see 1 or 2 mating attempts in a small group. Whereas one of our assistants saw 40 or more in a large group of 100 individuals or more. So with these guys, you're twice as likely to see mating behavior in groups of 11 to 15 versus 1 to 5 or 6 to 10. You are 20 times more likely to see it in groups of 16 to 20. So I guess when they're getting together, that's what they're doing.
Frisky.
That's the point. That's the point of those things. So with that excitement, that's what I have for the Hector's dolphins behavior and diet. And I just want to remind you again that babies look like rugby balls with flippers because it's just a cute way to end this section.
Right. So while we take a break, go
Yes.
Google baby Hector's dolphins.
Yes.
And enjoy.
We'll give you a little bit to do that. Go do it, and we'll be right back after a quick break. All right, we're back. And so Kat's going to tell us about the, this one is going to be, again, not super happy.
I mean, it rarely is.
It rarely is,
but
yeah. We had a couple recently, or at least one recently that was like.
Right, where it wasn't like terrible, but.
Yeah, but anyway.
Yeah, let me tell you how these guys are doing today. So in terms of their status, they do hold the record for being both the smallest and the rarest marine dolphin in the world. So the overall population of Hector's dolphins, including both Hectors and Maui dolphins, is listed as endangered according to the IUCN Red List. The Maui dolphin is extremely rare and is listed as critically endangered. And in terms of overall population, most of the more up-to-date sites were indicating there's around about 10,000 Hector's dolphins still remaining in the wild. The Maui dolphin subspecies is thought to only have about 55 individuals in their population. So it's pretty dire for them. I mean, they're really, really not doing well in terms of the overall population rate.
They're kind of on the road to the Vaquita, right?
Critically endangered.
Yeah.
So, and again, as we've talked about in previous episodes, there are various different issues, not, of course, once your population size gets small, there's something else going on. But when the population size does get that small, you are then having issues with things like inbreeding and things like that can compromise immune function and compromise reproductive ability and all those other things that go into a healthy population. So it kind of begins to compound the problem.
Exactly.
So what is pushing these guys over the edge? Number one is bycatch. So this is by far the biggest threat to Hector's dolphins. So again, as we've talked about, they are a coastal species and they do encounter a high rate of recreational and commercial fisheries. And like Cindy alluded to, they are particularly susceptible to bycatch in set, gill, and trawl nets, which are all setups used in coastal waters less than 100 meters deep. So basically, this is being put in their ideal environment. And as Cindy mentioned, they are sometimes even actively choosing to engage around these boats because of the smaller fish or larvae that they are churning up. So Basically, I do have some stats on this, which is kind of mind-blowing. So every year, as many as 150 dolphins die due to entanglement in these fisheries
150?
every year.
Jeez.
And there has been a 74% overall decline of the Hector's dolphins and a 90% loss of Maui dolphins over just 3 generations. So
Yeah,
basically,
dude.
since about the 60s and 70s,
Mhm.
these guys have been decimated.
That's it. That's the exact same story as the vaquita.
Yep. And so, I mean, it literally one site that I found explicitly said Hector's dolphins are now facing extinction. Like
Yeah.
we're
No,
there.
absolutely. Hmm.
Again, as we find with many species, the difficulty here is that this is directly competing with livelihood of a lot of people
Hmm.
around the coast. And very similar to parts of North America, parts of the UK and Europe, around the coast of New Zealand, fishing is a major, major activity and priority and livelihood of individuals living there. So there have been some steps to begin to reduce these losses. After the 2012 International Whaling Commission meeting, New Zealand did agree to ban gill nets in a particular portion of the Maui dolphin habitat. There have been proposals of sea sanctuaries, marine sanctuaries in different parts of their range as well on the South Island, I know. So there are steps being taken to try to reduce the impact overall of this type of entanglement and bycatch. But again, as we found with the vaquita, we'll see how much of an impact that can make. Like Cindy said, in terms of recovery and being able to rebound because of their life history and reproductive style. These guys are going to take longer to recover. So that means that we have to be implementing all of these protective measures over a much longer time span. This is not a quick fix. So it's challenging, and it's definitely a very interdisciplinary process. I think as marine scientists, it can be very easy to look at this and say, like, well, what are you doing? Stop it right now. We know what the problem is.
Right.
Um, it's not that simple. It never is, unfortunately. We're crossing multiple different sectors. There's a lot of different stakeholders involved. Um, and so it's a difficult situation. But again, I think, the Hector's dolphins have been getting a little bit more press
Yeah.
recently, which is great. There have been more direct actions to make people aware of the dire situation that they are in. Um, so hopefully this podcast can be a little bit of that, spreading the word, and just, educating people about what is actually going on with this population, because it's really not good.
Yeah. And I in the new research there's one specifically on the effectiveness of conservation. So we'll get into what they say about what needs to be done.
Cool. Yeah.
Mhm.
In terms of other issues, because of course it's not just bycatch, there are multiple other things that these guys are facing as well. Boat strikes is a big one. Again, living in that coastal range, they are in proximity to boats a lot, as we've said. Pollution, coastal development, seabed mining. Again, all of these are major disturbance impacts, potentially even direct mortality with boat strikes. Um, all of those things, as we've talked about in multiple other podcasts, do impact life history, reproduction, ability to forage correctly, social behavior, all of the things. So again, the more you're disturbing a population, the more difficult it's going to be for them to just go about their life as normal and forage as normal and do what they typically do.
Yeah, it's so
Um,
important to remember that not just the direct deaths, right? The indirect
mhm,
deaths of not being able to find your mate, to eat enough to have a baby, like all of those things are
mhm,
almost invisible in the terms of seeing how it's affecting the animals, but it
right.
greatly affects their ability to continue.
Yeah, and it can be hard to quantify, right? Like in terms of putting scientific numbers to something, it can be really difficult to quantify what effect these numbers have on direct mortality. But we know from multiple different studies that these do impact
Yeah.
success of these animals in the wild.
Mhm.
Um, like Cindy said, one of the other potential disturbance things that these guys are experiencing and a lot more now is the whale watch and the swim with program. So again, there's pros and cons here, right? Where we are increasing awareness and providing a really unique opportunity for education of individuals about the species, about how to protect them, about how to advocate for their protection in your local area. Of course, anything that is directly interacting with the animals, like the swim with programs, does have the potential to be a disturbance to them and to interrupt potentially vital interactions between, say, mothers and calves, or just individuals within the social structures. So there's pros and cons to both things, especially being such an endangered population. It's a little bit more tricky because you do want to be providing those educational opportunities and showing people how important it is for them to remain in our environment, but also how much disturbance can they take, because their threshold's already pretty low for how much additional disturbance they can take before it's really a problem for their populations.
And that's why I mentioned that the 31 boats out of that one harbor, like
Hmm.
that's a lot of trips in one day. Like there's basically no time where those animals are not around other boats that are watching, what specifically watch them versus just being
Right.
there.
And it's one of the arguments that we've had a lot in our region as well for watching the southern resident killer whale population, because it's the same thing. They are I mean, less so now, but back in the day, they were really the only killer whales to watch around this area consistently. And when you get upwards of 60 to 100 whale watch boats out there at the same time watching the same three pods every single day, that's going to have an effect. So again, it's the same thing for these guys, right? There's limited populations. They're in geographically isolated locations. You're going to be impacting the same animals, right? Because that's another thing, especially when we get into
Yeah.
whale watching, is there's the, okay, well, are you in, how many individuals are you impacting per trip and per day? And ideally, what you want is a turnover of animals, so you're not impacting the same animals consistently throughout the day. When you're in a geographically isolated location and they have strong site fidelity, you're very, very likely to be impacting the same animals
Yeah.
throughout the day. Um, so it gets a little tricky.
Yeah, and that's something that when you go, you get a permit from NOAA to be able to go out and do this work, or a permit from, I don't know what the permitting process looks like for whale watching boats, but particularly for research, you are supposed to note like what is the likelihood that you are going to harass the same animal in the same day type thing.
Correct.
So it's that how often are you hitting, getting to the same animal versus spreading it out, basically, which is
Right.
important to understand.
Right. Exactly. And then finally, the other aspect here that I want to touch on briefly is predation. So they do, they do, especially being a small dolphin species, they do have a few natural predators in and around New Zealand. So the seven gill sharks are actually thought to be their main predator.
Mm.
Great white and blue sharks all have been shown to predate on Hector's dolphins as well, which has been confirmed through dietary studies. Um, by living in the shallow coastal waters that they do, they are actually able to avoid predation from a lot of other species. However, things like killer whales, mako sharks, and bronze sharks have also been suggested as predators, but have been unconfirmed. So we don't definitively know that these things are eating on Hector's dolphins, but it's possible their ranges overlap. It's possible that here and there they might take one. But mostly predation from seven gill sharks, great white, or blue sharks are the main predator threats to these guys.
Well, and then that makes sense as to why they're hugging the coast, right? They're like, I'm gonna stay in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
shallows where it's not as scary.
Right, absolutely. And I would too if I only grew to 4 to 5 feet in the
Right.
ocean. Like, yeah, no, I'm going to stay close to shore. Thank you very much.
I'm gonna have a not the whole 3D effect. I'm just gonna have this more shallow range that I can see around rather than like 1,000 feet of
Yes,
deep water.
yes. So I do have a couple of fun facts that we'll save till the end.
Yes.
Um, so yeah, but let's get into what research is being done in current years on these guys.
So I'm going to start off with the ones that are more linked to the threats, mainly because I also don't want to end on those. But
Good
interestingly,
idea.
I couldn't find, there wasn't a lot of like super recent research. A lot of them are from 2012, 2013, which is still recent, but
Mm.
not, I was surprised that I couldn't find any more like ones that had just come out. But anyway, so there was research on the effects of toxoplasmosis. So the Toxoplasma
Mm-hmm.
gondii, I believe it's a
Gandhi.
uh, protist, I believe, parasite. And this is, likely have heard it with monk seals in Hawaii. The very, very big problem there comes from cat poop. And so there has been more talk about this particular parasite with a variety of different marine mammals, some more than others. But it was interesting that this one seems to be more of an issue for the Hector's dolphins. So previously, mortality due to infectious diseases have not been well investigated for the species, but these guys found 7 of 28, so 25% of ones that they saw died due to toxoplasmosis, including
Wow.
2 of the 3 Maui dolphins that they found. stranded, which is huge. You lose 2 Maui dolphins, that's a massive amount. Then a further 10 had evidence of the parasite in one or more tissues, but that wasn't the cause of death, which doesn't mean it wouldn't end up being if they lived longer from whatever else the cause of death was, 7 of the 8 genotyped isolates were an atypical type 2 genotype, and I wasn't able to really get into why that's, if there's anything specifically important about that particular genotype, but it is interesting that it's an atypical one. So what's happening, right? Why is it mutating and sticking around in Hector's dolphins? So they were just saying that this may be an issue, an additional issue to the decline on top of everything else that Kat already mentioned, and particularly for the Maui's dolphins, if this is hitting them hard. So one thing that you can do if you're down there in New Zealand is to don't put your cat poop down the drain, put it in, and don't let cats outside, that the water can flush the feces out into the marine waters. Keeping them in your local trash is the best way to get rid of cat poop. Anywhere, actually, not just there.
Yep.
The next one I have is linked to that is, and so that was Rowe et al. At 2013. Then I have Lunesen et al. At 2019. That's the impact of pile driving. So again, the close to shore constructions. So during piling operations, the dolphin positive minutes per day, so basically how often they heard, these are passive acoustic devices, how often they heard them, decreased significantly at the detector that was closest to the piling, but increased at the mid-harbor detector. So basically they left right next to the pile driving and went a little bit farther out away from it, and hung out there. So the one that was close to the pile driving, the detections decreased with the increased sound exposure level. So basically the louder it got, the fewer dolphins were going to be around there. The longer piling the event, the longer the piling event was associated with longer reductions in detections. So the longer the time the piling was the pile driving was happening, the longer there were no dolphins there. Right?
Yeah, because why would you want to get something that's super loud? Like, no,
right.
thanks. We're
just gonna hang out
till this quiets down. We're gonna just peace out.
Exactly. And on that, so the effects were long lasting. It took up to 83 hours for the detection levels to return to the pre-piling numbers. So
wow.
that's
poor little guys.
4 days, roughly. A little bit less,
yep.
3 or 4 days. Yeah, 72 would be 3 days. So yeah, it'd be like 3.5 days before they would return to the area, which is huge if that's where they need to eat.
Right. Well, I was going to say, for a species that's so linked to a specific location with having such strong site fidelity, that's a huge displacement.
Yeah, they're feeding around there all the time. They can't feed everywhere, right? So depending on where that location is, could be very detrimental more than others. Depends. So on food, Miller et al. 2012 did some stomach content analysis from a long range. It was the first quantitative assessment of prey composition. So they know what they ate, but they didn't see like how much of each they did. And this is from 1984 to 2006. So long time frame. The most common was that red cod, the pink cod, the huru, the arrow squid, the sprat, the sole, and the stargazer, with 77% of diet by mass. So just the amount of body material they found. And red cod specifically was 37% by mass. So that's really kind of their big prey species. The uhuru and Hector's lanternfish were consumed in large numbers. So I think that's important to remember with these diet studies, is that there's a difference between how by percentage by mass versus just the strict numbers. If they're really small fish, you could have a whole lot of numbers of the 200 animals that you ate, but that's not a lot of the mass because the animals are so small that you're eating.
Right.
Yeah. So then most of them were between 1 to 60 centimeters in length, but most were less than 10. So again, they're eating a lot of smaller things, which makes sense because they're tiny themselves. So that indicates that for some species, the juveniles are being targeted rather than the adults, which is important to understand. The east and west diets were significantly different. Javelin fish were more important to the west coast animals, and more demersal prey, or ones that are on the bottom, were on the East Coast animals. And so if we go back to what they were eating, the West Coast only ate those 4 different species. And so, and the javelin fish were important for those guys. So again, those differences will factor into how well they can survive these different threats that may be affecting what prey they get to eat. They do feed throughout the water column, and the difference in diet between populations is thought to be reflective of prey availability. So it's just whatever's at those locations. I mean, again, if they're not leaving those locations, they get whatever they get. That's kind of what they have to deal with. Then the next one is on the effectiveness of the conservation measures. This is Slutin et al. 2010, and Slutin is kind of the big researcher with these animals. A lot of the papers that you'll see have her name on them. So they used estimates from an observer program on commercial gill netting, and there were no quantitative estimates of bycatch by amateur gill netters or trawl fisheries. So they could only look at commercial gill nets for their data. But they used that information from the estimates of how often they get bycaught in commercial gill nets, and they put it into what's called a simple population viability analysis, or PVA. And they predicted what would happen under 3 different scenarios of how much would be bycaught and what their population would look like. So they did the status quo, nothing changes. They did the new regulations that were put in 2008 by the Minister of Fisheries, and then a third one where total protection happened. And so what the current population is right now is 27% of the population from 1970.
Yeah, so a decrease of 70%.
Yeah, exactly. So that's a lot in a short amount of time. And so when they looked at the projections, projections under the status quo, or even the new regulations by the Minister of Fisheries, showed a continued decline. For the one with the new regulations in place, that was driven by bycatch due to much weaker protection measures on the South Island West Coast. And that's also where they have less diverse prey again. So linking back to that one more time. So they have weaker protections in areas where they have less opportunity for other things to eat as well. And so even with the protections in place, those new regulations, it's not going to help enough. For the last one, where it was total protection, all populations are projected to increase. The population would double by 2050 and reach half of its 1970 population in under 40 years. So again, back to that, how long is it going to take to get them back to where they're at? Longer than we would want, because of how their life history is, their reproduction that we talked about. And that's with all protections, nobody getting bycaught, like no extra mortalities due to human interference, which is unlikely to happen. So not super happy there. But that isn't to say that, the protections are still protecting them. It's slowing down the decline. If we can do other things that can help increase, like there's things to do. But it just makes it's just difficult with how their population works. The next one is Hammer et al. 2013. And this was long range movements of Hectors that may help Maui's dolphins, which was very cool. So between 2010 to 2012, they had 44 individuals that were sampled in the Maui distribution, where the Maui dolphins are. 4 of these animals were genetically identified as Hector's dolphins. So again, hard to tell in the wild. They had 2 live females, 1 dead female, and 1 dead male. So that indicates that some Hector's dolphins are swimming all the way up to meet with the Maui dolphins, which is interesting. They had 2 Hector's dolphins, 1 dead female neonate, and 1 living male that were sampled along the North Island's southwest coast, which is outside of either subspecies ranges.
Oh, interesting.
So it's possible there's a population there that nobody really knows about. And who knows if it's newer, maybe someone just went up there and was like, hey, this is a cool place, I'm going to stay.
They did show that there was a long distance dispersal by Hector's dolphins, more than 400 kilometers. So again, larger than what the long range that we talked about earlier. And so that there is a possible unsampled Hector's population along that southwest coast of the North Island. Two living Hector's dolphins were sampled when in association with Maui's dolphins, so they're hanging out together, which is interesting.
That's curious.
But yeah, there is currently no evidence of interbreeding.
Right, but they have crossover potentially with location, which is curious.
So, I mean, maybe it hasn't happened yet, or we didn't sample an individual that showed us that it did. But if they're hanging out together, I mean, and they're subspecies, there's certainly no reason why they can't interbreed.
Yeah.
So maybe that's this could be a good thing, right? If they get up there and they hang out long enough, they're going to start interbreeding. I don't see how that would not happen if they are mixing, and that could be very helpful for the Maui dolphin. And so again, it's a reminder that those were only found because of genetics, because the two subspecies look almost identical. And so that's another part of the power of genetics is getting into that information, knowing who's who. And the last thing I have was cool. Again, going back to photo ID, because that's one of my favorite things, is Webster et al. 2010. They used laser photogrammetry for measuring Hector's dolphins. So they basically set up their camera with these two little lasers. That it's funny in the paper they're like they're safe, but don't look directly into them. That could cause damage. But like you don't have to worry about like being lasered.
That's funny.
But don't stare at the lasers. So they have these two parallel lasers that were set up for a certain, I think it was 10 centimeters apart, and onto the tripod for the camera that they used. And then they basically took the pictures and had the laser beams hitting the dorsal fins when they took the ID shots. And so it allowed them to measure dorsal fin dimensions. So the laser dots were projected onto the fin, providing the scale and thus allowing them to measure the different aspects of the dorsal fin. And also photo ID 34 individuals based on fin nicks and other marks. So a kind of two things happening at once there. And so they used measurement and age data that were collated from 233 necropsied Hector's dolphins. So they could base like, okay, what are the relationship between these dorsal fin height and length and whatever's and the total length of the animal, and that correlates to what the age of the animal is. And they found that fin length was a better predictor of total length than fin height. So the I guess more like, oh well, I guess the length was up there, but that particular measurement could allow them to then extrapolate what the length of the individual is likely to be, and thus what age category it might be in, or at least get closer to it. So you can use that fin data to estimate total length and thus the age of the animal, which can be very important in understanding like how many adults are out there, how many juveniles, in understanding how well the population is doing, and are there enough reproductive individuals left to be able to help. So I like ending on that one because this is some cool new, this is 2010, so not super new, but relatively new. But using those technologies in different ways to be able to find out this data that we normally wouldn't otherwise be easily able to get, that can really help with direct conservation by providing the information of understanding the population, which you need before you can do any good conservation measures, which goes back to that long-term monitoring that we like to harp on here.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Well, let's end with some fun facts.
Yes.
Okay, so as you guys know, if you are regular listeners, I like to do the name stuff because it's really fun to learn about the etymology of some of these. So for the Hector's dolphins, you might be wondering why the heck are they called Hector's dolphins? So let me tell you.
Hector?
Yes, shockingly. Okay. Just once I would like one of these to be named after a woman who discovered them, but I don't know if we're ever going to get there in movies that we're talking through. I was just realizing that when I was doing the research. I'm like, anyway. I digress.
Because they were all done many years ago when
I know. So the Hector's dolphin was named after Sir James Hector, who was around from 1834 to 1907.
And he was the lanternfish too, the Hector's lanternfish.
Probably, yeah, that would make sense. He was the curator of the Colonial Museum in Wellington, and he examined the first specimen of the dolphin that was found. Species was then scientifically described by a Belgian zoologist, Pierre Joseph van Beneden, in 1881. So the species name is Cephalorhynchus hectori.
Yes.
And the etymology of the subspecies, the Maui dolphin, which is Cephalorhynchus hectori maui, is based on a Maori legend about a man who was, while fishing, pulled up the North Island, which is known as Te Ika a Maui. So because they are found around the North Island,
makes sense.
Maui's dolphin. Yeah. So I thought that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And then, like Cindy alluded to at the beginning of our conversation today, they have lots of other nicknames that they are known as, or other kind of common names. So some of the fun ones were Mickey Mouse dolphins because of the dorsal fin,
Right.
Hobbit dolphins because of their
Hobbit.
size.
Oh,
yeah,
I love it.
Because of their size, and I'm like, well, also because they're native to New Zealand, because
Right.
Hobbit, duh.
Hobbits, yeah.
And other names include white-headed dolphin, New Zealand white front dolphin, little pied dolphin.
I like the little pied dolphin.
So super cute name. Yeah, it's really cute because they're mostly like black, gray, and white. But yeah, Hobbit dolphin was my favorite personally because they're just small. They're just like little dolphins. Yep.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And just in case
there we go. I'm gonna end on Hobbit dolphins.
Hobbit dolphin. And just in case anybody doesn't know, the reason why New Zealand and hobbits go together is because they filmed Lord of the Rings
and the Hobbit
and the Hobbit, and they have hobbits, don't they? They have the whole village you can go visit.
Yes. So the whole of that world was filmed in New Zealand. So
yeah,
I thought that was pretty cute.
So it's a hobbit dolphin that have babies that are rugby balls with flippers.
I mean, how could you not love them?
I know, they're just the best ever. I'm just saying. So with that, we will leave you with the hobbit dolphin that has babies that look like rugby balls with flippers. And we'll be with you next episode. Will be a journal review, and this will be the first one that was suggested to us by one of our long-term listeners. So get ready for that in a couple weeks. Yes, thank you very much for that. We love getting ideas and what you guys want to hear. So we'll do that next time, and be sure to remember Christmas is coming up. We'll also be having our annual fundraiser. So if you enjoy the content that we are giving you, and please look on Facebook. We'll have a Facebook fundraiser as well as another outside page. But we would really appreciate your support to help us continue to do the work that we're doing and the information we're sharing with you. You can also go to our gift store and find all the cool merch. Again, there are some newer colors up for some of the shirts that you can order. So take a look there, and all the proceeds go back to the work that we're doing and the research that we're conducting and the information that we're sharing. So thank you all for listening, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
This was brought to you by Pacific Mammal Research, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. To learn more about the species we discuss, check out our blog. Head to our website, www.pacmam.org, that's PACMAM.org, to check it out. Also, help us continue providing fun and educational content like this by donating today. Your help is how we can continue to do our work and share it with you. Thanks.